So, wir würden gerne weitermachen.
Okay, we'd like to continue, and I'll be handing the microphone directly to an old hand here, because he already knows how it works.
Hello,
Hello, my name's Roland. I'm from Düsseldorf. From Düsseldorf. The next presentation is about what do you do? The importance of observational assessment and following the child. Enjoy. Thank you, says Claudia.
Thank you, Florian. Hello, everybody. It's a big surprise to be in Germany because I thought I would never be here again, and I'm very pleased to be here. By tomorrow, I probably don't want to go home, but I must go back. And I want to begin by thanking the German CHARGE organization, because it is an amazing organization with very limited resources and only a very small number of people. You manage to produce a totally professional, first-class international conference every 2 years. It's always fantastic, and it's always as good as any other conference that we ever go to. So we love coming here because we know we'll be appreciated, we know we'll be supported, and we always stay in the Castle Hotel, which is very luxurious, so we're not used to that. So it's a bit like a holiday for us, a little vacation. I'm presenting today about observational assessment, and I presented with my colleague Julie Meyer, who is also here. 6 years ago, we did a big presentation about assessment, and this session overlaps a little bit with what we did then, but it has a narrower focus. And quite by accident, at lunchtime, I discovered this copy of the Trommelwirbel, and I wrote an article several years ago about this topic, and it's in the magazine translated into German. So I recommend it. There are copies on the table here, and you might learn more from this than from me talking, possibly, because I'm also very jet-lagged, and I'm ready for bed, but later. So, I've been working with children with CHARGE for 39 years, and I always feel that people don't pay attention to the children, especially the professionals. They like to read about CHARGE syndrome. They like to get an idea of typical CHARGE syndrome, which doesn't exist, but they like an idea of typical CHARGE syndrome, and then they use that when they assess the child and when they teach the child. And I go into homes, but especially into schools in California, and I observe the child the whole time I'm watching the child. And if I go in to do an assessment, people often, they want to give me the child, and they think I will take the child off to a special room, and I will do an assessment. And it's a bit like doing magic tricks, you know. And the child will come out of a hat, and I will tell them everything that it is to know about the child. And I say, no, no, no. All I'm going to do is watch and listen, and I will make notes. I always have paper and a pen, even when I'm presenting to you. And I watch for hours and hours, and I follow the child, and I write down everything I see about the child and everything that people tell me. And at the end of that process, I already have quite a good idea who that child is, what they like, what they dislike, what they can do, and what they like doing. And that's the information you need in order to make an educational program and teach the child. So there is a place for more standardized assessment. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen checklists of skills, and it will begin with, like, can the child make eye contact? Does the child go still when you make a noise? Can the child turn towards the noise if it's on the right or on the left? Is the child able to sit up? And all those kind of questions. What that assessment is doing is trying to match this child to a set of ideas about what we think children should be doing. But that's all it does. And the danger with that kind of assessment is what we call deficit assessment. And I'm sure probably all of you have a child who's been subjected to a deficit assessment. And a professional comes in, and they're trained, and they probably are earning good money because it's their job. And at the end of it, they've discovered that your child can't speak, your child doesn't make any signs, your child can't sit up by themselves, your child doesn't eat orally, your child has breathing difficulties, and so on, and so on, and so on. And it's all the negative things which the child can't do. And those checklists usually don't have questions like, what does this child like? Because that's too open. They don't like that kind of thing. They say, does the child like being touched? Does the child like being lifted and carried? They will give special examples, but they won't just say, what does this child like? Who is this child? And I've been a teacher for 50 years in August, which is shocking. And I've always campaigned to say, why don't you look at the child? You know, everything I need for assessment is the child, and some paper and a pen, and then some time, because I need hours and hours to follow and to watch and to listen. So that's really what I'm talking about today. And I want to start with a picture. This is a girl I worked with in California a long time ago. She has CHARGE syndrome. She's 8 years old. Her name is Gracie. She's been in school all day, and she's come home, and half an hour after she gets home, her mother sees this and takes a photo, emails it to me immediately, and says, what's this? What's happening? What's wrong with this picture? Gracie has very severe medical issues, severe breathing difficulties, undeveloped muscles. Her breathing difficulties result in repeated chokings. She has a tracheostomy, a gastrostomy tube for feeding. She has lots of digestive problems, chronic constipation. She has seizure disorder. And she's a very weak, very vulnerable child. She can't sit unsupported. She can't stand and support her own weight. And then she comes home from school, and she does something which would be completely impossible for me, and for most of you, I think. And this is what she does. And if you're using a standardized assessment, this doesn't tell you anything, because the assessment will not say, can this child balance between the chair and the sofa on her back with, they don't look at that. But if you use observational assessment, this gives you a wonderful gift of understanding and insight. So, I've made a little list the other day. What is Gracie doing in this picture? Everything the children do has a meaning for them. It probably doesn't have a meaning for us, but it isn't about us, it's about them. And the meaning is the key to understanding them and understanding how to teach them. So, is Gracie relaxing and calming down because she's been in a wheelchair all day in a very noisy, very busy classroom, which I know well, and it was very busy. So is this relaxation? Like I would come home and have a malt whiskey, probably, and put some music on. She can't do that. I mean, I don't think she'd ever had malt whiskey because she wasn't my child, maybe. But I think she's probably relaxing, or as they say in California, she's chilling out. Or is she waking herself up? Has she been so overloaded in the classroom that when she comes home, it's her opportunity to start coming alive again because the environment now is very friendly and supportive, and it's not hostile to her. It doesn't threaten her because she's at home. So is she relaxing and calming down, or is she waking up? And it could be both. Is she trying to improve her breathing because her airway is very narrow, and if she extends backwards, it opens the airway, so it makes breathing easier for her. She suffers a lot from constipation, and extension backwards relieves the discomfort of severe constipation down here on the stomach. So could she be doing it partly to relieve the pain of constipation? Is she improving the contact between her brain and her body? She has multi-sensory problems, so the connection between her brain and her body, which is all the senses, none of them is working properly for Gracie, like most people with CHARGE syndrome. And when she does this, she's giving herself some very strong sensory information, which gives her brain a much better idea where her body is and what her body is doing. Is she doing it because it feels good? Is it just something she likes to do, and this is her favorite hobby when she comes home from school? Is she doing it because she can do it, and it feels good? Because if I could do this, I would be doing it, and I would tell you I could do it, but I have to be, you know already I could never do this, and I would cause a big problem with my back. But I couldn't even get in that position. So it's not easy to interpret what you observe. But with time and with practice, you can get better at making these lists of possible explanation. And sometimes it's more than one of those things. And I think actually for Gracie, every one of those explanations could be true. Either all at the same time, or some of them and some others at different times on different days. Gracie's professional assessments from the school district were very negative. She was a girl who could hardly do anything and was in a wheelchair and had very low vision and showed no responses to sound. I worked with her twice in school and once at home, and already we had 3 pages of skills and abilities that we could use to build the educational program on. That's what we need. We don't need to know what the children can't do. Any fool can tell you what your children can't do, and nobody should be paid for telling you what your children can't do. You know what your children can't do. But it takes skill to see what your children can do and to understand what it means. So, I'll now start my presentation. That was my introduction. So first of all, it's important to remember that CHARGE is very unusual syndrome, and it's very complicated. And although people like me and Kim Blake, everyone says we are experts in CHARGE syndrome, there's so much we don't know and so much we don't understand. And every time when we meet, we talk about new ideas we've had and new possibilities, because we are also trying to understand what is going on with the children. I have two laptops because this is my English slides and my German is not great. So the uniqueness and the complexity of the syndrome is a big challenge, especially for professionals who don't have any experience of CHARGE. And is there a parent in the room who hasn't had to explain CHARGE syndrome to professionals? I'm sure you've all had to tell people about CHARGE. And as I say, you're talking to people who are being paid to work with your child, but you're the ones doing the work because they don't know the syndrome. And the limits of your understanding are the limits of what they get when you explain what you know. And in the long period of time that I've been working with the children, we've seen many, many changes. And I think the big change over 39 years, two big changes. 39 years ago in London, many of the babies who were referred to us died very young. It was much more common for those babies to die. We now have much better idea of the problems and the challenges, and it's people like Kim especially who've helped us see what we need to do proactively with a baby with CHARGE the moment the diagnosis is made. Up comes an idea of the checklist of all the danger areas and the possible problems. And of course, the medical technology has improved. 39 years ago, I almost never saw a child with a gastrostomy tube or tracheostomy. It was very rare. Now it's very, very common, of course, but back then we just didn't know about those things. But the other side of that means more and more of the children are surviving, but they are more complicated than the children who used to survive 40 years ago. So we're now seeing levels of medical involvement that we never saw 40 years ago because those children all died very, very quickly. So it's been a learning process from what looked very complicated in 1983 now looks really simple and straightforward into the current day when looking at children around here, you can see multiple levels of complication. And I wrote an article some time ago, and this is a quote from my article, and I'm just trying to make the point that children with CHARGE syndrome actually are deaf-blind, or I prefer to say they have multi-sensory impairment. In other words, all their sensory systems are probably not working properly. Some of them are missing completely, and many of them are there, but they're not working very effectively. And for me, the biggest challenge with that, as I said, is that the brain is only connected to the body through the senses. Your brain only knows what your body is doing and where your body is and what's around your body because of your senses. And if those senses are taken away, or if they're not working properly, your brain doesn't have a very good idea where you are, or where your body is, or what your body is doing. And I've already seen one child today who clearly didn't know where her legs were and where her feet were. And her brain needs to be woken up to realizing that those feet and legs are down there, and they're an important part of her body. So the emphasis on multisensory impairment is something we have to keep pushing. And because I was a deaf-blind specialist, I realized this straight away 39 years ago, but many, many professionals had no idea that these children had multisensory problems. And things like deafness and visual impairment and lack of smell were being picked up very, very late when children were 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. And now if a diagnosis of CHARGE is made, all those sensory systems should be evaluated and tested very quickly to make sure we know what's working and what's not working. And the senses, this is my list. This isn't a complete list because there are other senses as well. But I think these are the most important senses to think about. And I'm sure in German schools, just like in British schools, you learn that there are 5 senses. And you learn what they are, and we all know what they are. But actually, there are more than 5. And some of the ones that are more than 5 are really important. And I think pain, it's really important to remember that pain is a sensory system. And pain serves a crucially important function in terms of survival. And we know that the majority of people with CHARGE don't perceive pain in a very normal way. I think most children with CHARGE that I've known seem to have a high pain threshold. They don't feel pain very easily, and that's dangerous. It's very nice because it means if you go in the hospital and they have a needle, they don't feel it like we do. But it's also very dangerous. And I know a child who burned her arm very badly on a heater because she put her arm against it and didn't know. And it took a long time for her to realize. And we've seen children who have cuts and don't realize they're bleeding because they don't feel it very effectively. And the 2 senses that I talk about a lot are proprioception and the vestibular sense, or Gleichgewicht. Proprioception is a sense in the muscles and the joints all through the body, and the receptors are triggered by compression or stretching or twisting. So if any part of your body gets under pressure or gets stretched or gets twisted, the proprioceptive sense sends a message to your brain to tell you that's what's happening. And if this sense is working properly, it means your brain always knows exactly where all your body is and what it's doing. And the only exception for us would be, in English, we talk about a leg going to sleep. You probably say the same in German. You sit on your leg watching the television, and then somebody rings your doorbell. You get up, and you can't feel your leg because you've stopped the supply of blood, so the receptors are not working. And it's purely temporary, but it's not very nice when you get the feeling back and you get all that strange feeling of little pins and needles in your leg. Imagine if that inability to feel your leg is there permanently, and it's both legs and maybe your shoulders and your arms and your hands. And what would you do about that? Well, you would probably put those parts of your body under a lot of pressure or a lot of stretching or a lot of twisting. and you would pull the fingers back a long way, you would entwine the hands, you would wrap your arms, you would wind your legs tight, you would curl into a little ball. All those behaviors are very, very typical of charge, especially in young children, but also in adults as well, and especially when you are sick. When you get ill, you tend to do these things even more because deep pressure calms you down. When you get upset or when you feel ill, you look for deep pressure because it helps you to cope and it calms everything down. The other sense is more complicated, which is the vestibular sense. That sense is located in both ears, the inner ear on both sides of the head, and that tells you about the position of your head, where your head is, and whether your head is moving or not moving. But it also tells you all sorts of other things. And we know in CHARGE syndrome, most people with CHARGE, that sense is not working properly. And sometimes if they do a scan of the inner ear, you can see on the scan that the vestibular receptors are missing, or parts are missing, or they're the wrong shape. They are malformed. But also, sometimes the scan will show everything is perfect, but it only shows you the anatomy. It shows you the structure, but the anatomy is not plugged in. It's like a light, which is a perfect light, but it doesn't work because it's not plugged into the power socket, so there's no electricity. And what tells you there are vestibular problems is the child's behavior and the posture. And if you're born with vestibular problems, you tend to like to be flat on your back on the floor as much as possible. The safest possible position. And again, I'm sure you've all experienced this with your children. It can take a long time sometimes to get them up off the floor because they don't like resisting gravity, because they don't have good ways to protect themselves if they fall over. And those two senses, you need to know about them, and you need to let other people know about them in CHARGE syndrome. The first child I ever met with CHARGE was 10 months old. I worked with him for 3 years, and he seemed, he was described as mentally retarded. I thought he was very intelligent, but he kept lying down. And when you lifted him up, he got very angry and upset, and he kept pushing back to go down. And we didn't understand why, because we didn't know about CHARGE syndrome. Nobody knew about CHARGE syndrome. And I realized this was typical CHARGE behavior, but it was 14 years later that a team in the Netherlands discovered major vestibular problems in the inner ear. We could see them in the children, but nobody had actually identified what the problem was. And we now think maybe 95% of children with CHARGE have significant vestibular problems with all sorts of implications. So let's think about why people assess children with CHARGE. Well, children get assessed all the time, and they don't need to have developmental problems to be assessed. And there are many different reasons why they are assessed. And one of the reasons they're assessed is to see if they are entitled to things, to see if they deserve to have things like special services. Do they deserve to have physiotherapy? Do they deserve to have a teacher of the deaf? Do they deserve to have hearing aids? And so on. And those kind of tests have a pass or fail structure. The child either has visual impairment or they don't have visual impairment. And it's pass or fail. My kind of assessment, nobody ever fails, because all I'm doing is trying to understand the child. The only person who can fail is me if I don't do the assessment properly. And sometimes I fail because the children are so complicated, I can't think what is happening, and I need more time to do what I'm doing. So it's very much about trying to understand who the child is and what's working and what's not working for them. Why does it go wrong? Well, first of all, charge is very complex, as I said, and most people don't know much about it. Secondly, there's such a variety in the syndrome. I mean, on one level, all people with charge have great similarity. I talk about charge syndrome, and at the end, a parent I don't know comes to me very excited and says, "You have just described my son perfectly." And they think I'm a genius. But I know the very common features that we see in the population. So there are big similarities. But at the same time, every child with charge is completely different from every other child with charge. This is part of the complexity and the uniqueness of the syndrome. And I've had people say to me, "Oh, this boy doesn't have charge syndrome because he's not deaf." Well, that doesn't mean anything. You can have charge syndrome with normal hearing. You can have charge syndrome with normal vision. It's not so common, but it's perfectly possible. So people don't understand the variety and the complexity in the syndrome. What else am I saying? Oh, yes. People are often trained in one form of assessment. And I've spent decades with teachers telling them about my approach to observational assessment, and they're very unhappy with it because they want a plan, they want a structure, they want a checklist, and they want to be able to look at the checklist and say, "Can the child do this?" And you try. They don't do it. Nope. Can the child do, "Oh, they did that." Yes. That's what they're trained to do. And I'm saying, no, don't, put the checklist in your bag. Let's just watch this girl. We'll watch her for 2 hours, and we'll talk about what we see, and we'll have ideas about what it means and why she might be doing it. And it's a very strange thing to do for most professionals. They're not trained to think in this way. But it's the only way that works, in my experience, because the other ways don't give you the key to the child. There are limited resources, and it's hard to get people to assess children. And often they come in and they only have 1 hour, and they have to do a full assessment in 1 hour, and they can't come back again. That doesn't work. And I say to people, even I can't go in for 1 hour and do a good assessment. It takes time. You have to spend a lot of time, and you have to think very hard, and then you have to talk to other people to help you get to an understanding. And finally, the people doing the assessment often forget why they're doing it. They forget that this is about that child. It isn't just a routine. It's not like, I have to assess this girl because then I get paid. Or I have to assess this child. I can't go home tonight until I do the assessment. So we've got to get it done. And the moment I can check the box and say, I've done an assessment, it's all done. And I don't have to worry about it. That isn't a good attitude to have when you're trying to understand these complicated children. So I've got 2 diagrams which you may have seen. They're pyramids, and this is a diagram showing typical learning. And this isn't mine, I should say. An American woman called Linda Alsop made this design, and we've all stolen it from her. because it's so brilliant. So in typical learning, most of what children learn is this huge part at the bottom. Incidental learning. They see things, they hear things, they try things and it goes wrong, and then they try it and it works. And they learn that way. And if you're in a family that uses bad language, they learn the bad language. And somebody like me goes in and they say some terrible words, and the parents say, I don't know where he heard that. And I think, well, I know where he heard. We're sitting right there. But, you know, it's amazing to think how much regularly developing children learn that we don't teach them. They just learn because all their senses are developing and working, and they put two and two together again and again and again and again, and they learn. And then you've got secondary learning, where there's a little more structure and somebody is actually trying to teach, but it can be in a group. And that's more like a typical classroom where, you know, where I was educated, where we were all sitting down like you are, and the teacher said things and showed us things, and we all learned together at the same time. And then at the very top, you've got direct learning or direct teaching, which is where there's one adult and one child, and you teach. And, you know, my mother had 4 boys, and we all learned how to fry an egg, how to make a pot of tea, how to make toast, how to sew a button onto a shirt, and how to darn a hole in a sock. You know, if your sock had a hole, you had to darn the hole. I'm very old, you see. Nobody does that anymore. But she used to say, I'm not raising any fools. You will all be able to cook, make toast and fry an egg and sew a button on. But it was all direct. That was all direct teaching. She had to be right there with us, showing us, and then we would do it and she would watch. With children who are deaf-blind, like most of the children with CHARGE, that pyramid is completely turned the other way up. And the accidental learning, the environmental learning, usually is only a very, very small part of what they learn, because they don't see so well, they don't hear so well, they probably don't move very well for a long time. So they miss out on all those things that your other children pick up on, and you don't even know they're doing it. They also have problems with secondary learning. It's quite hard, especially with young children with CHARGE, to put them in a group with 4 other children and teach them. Some children can do it, most of them can't. And some children with CHARGE can't do that even when they are teenagers, because they have so many sensory problems and they are so distractible. What they need is direct instruction, 1 adult and 1 child. It's completely different. And what this tells us, what this big emphasis on direct one-on-one teaching is, it has to be individual. And that's a key to the whole field of deaf-blind education. The educational program has to be individual. It has to be designed for this child. Not generally for children who are 5 years old, not generally for deaf children who are 5 years old, not even generally for children with CHARGE syndrome who are 5 years old, because they're all so different. So it has to be John's program, or Mary's program, or Tina's program. And that can be quite difficult to convey to the school district, as I'm sure you've discovered. They think they have good professional skills at assessing children and teaching children, and then they get a student with CHARGE syndrome, and it doesn't work. And it's too easy to blame the child. And then we get those wonderful words, the N word, he's very naughty. The most popular is the L word, he's very lazy. And you may have seen an article I wrote called Why Are Children with CHARGE Syndrome So Lazy? It's a quote from a physiotherapist. And professionals say that to me all the time. Those children are so lazy, aren't they? They always like to lie down. They never want to work all morning. They pretend to get tired. I think, oh God, you know, we have a big problem of education here, and it's not the child, it's the professionals who are being paid. And because I'm from Wales, and in Wales, you know, it's a depressed area. Money is very important to us. And I always think, if you're being paid to educate a child, you damn well educate them, you know, because you're going to get paid at the end of the month anyway. But you need to earn your money. And it's not good enough to say, well, this child is very lazy. This child is very naughty. This child has been very spoiled by her family. I mean, I hear those things all the time and have to fight against them. So I'm now damning schools, which is always popular with parents, I discovered. So what am I pushing as my view of assessment? I've said individualizing. The idea I'm talking to you about this afternoon is unusual. It's not very common, as I've already said. It's totally positive. The child can't fail because the child is not being measured against anything else except themselves. I'm just trying to find out who they are, so there's no possibility of them failing. It looks at the child's positive skills and positive achievements because that's where we learn what to teach. If you tell me this child can't see anything, can't hear anything, can't sit up, can't eat, can't walk, what am I going to teach them? I can't just teach them to walk. I need to know where to start to work on. And that needs to be based on their positive skills. I need to know what they can do already so I know where to take them next. That's the only way teaching works. It looks at preferences and interests, and I'll talk more about the child's likes and the child's interests, because that's very important. And fortunately, children with CHARGE have very strong interests. Sometimes they're so strong that that's all they want to do. And you have big battles because you can't always be in the pool every day from breakfast time to bedtime. So you have to negotiate. And the children with CHARGE are not good negotiators. And I can tell by your faces, you understand me very well. And most importantly, the last one here, I approach every child assuming that they are intelligent. Even if I see reports saying they are mentally retarded or there are severe cognitive issues, I assume that they're intelligent, and my job is to find their intelligence and identify it, and then work out ways we can use their intelligence to teach them and get their attention. And then the other things, why do I assess children? First of all, I want to understand the child. I come in and I don't know the child. I've read some reports, maybe, or I met Max yesterday in here. And I felt within 15 minutes I was starting to get a good idea of who Max was and what Max was thinking. He was very expressive. Many teachers would have seen Max as a big problem. He's too busy, he's too active, He's not looking at me. He's not interested in me. Big problem. But I'm looking at what he is interested in and how he shows his interest. And the way he used, he'd never been in this room, the way he used vision, the way he checked this amazing ceiling again and again, the way he explored the corners of the room, 3 corners of the room again and again. It's very intelligent behavior. And it's criminal to miss that and think he's just hyperactive and distractible. You can easily make it all very negative. To me, it was just 15 minutes of positive demonstrations of intelligence and awareness. He also, at times, he went down the rows, he looked down a row, and then he looked at the row this way. He sometimes used touch to confirm, because he doesn't have full normal vision. So sometimes he had to touch things. And then later, in the dining area, he approached the floor, which had a pattern, a carpet with patterns. And the first thing he did was hold on to the wall, because he couldn't tell visually if the floor was flat or if there were lots of things. So he held on to the wall, then he stepped on the carpet. You know, these are very important clues about his intelligence and his potential for development. But you have to observe, and you have to observe carefully, and then you have to understand what you're seeing. And that's the challenge. Where am I going? I'm also trying to get a positive relationship. If I'm going to be involved with the child, I want to get a good relationship. I don't want to grab them and try and make them do something, and I don't even know if they can do it, or if they're experienced with it, or if they like it. I used to do that. You know, let's go back 40 years. And if the child wouldn't come and sit down, I'd lift them up and put them in the chair, and we'd go to the table, because I thought you had to teach children in a chair at a table. And many children with charge learn much better if they're on the floor, or if they're standing up, or if they're walking around. And again, that's not popular in schools, because schools are about chairs and tables. So you have a lot of diplomatic work to do to persuade them of your way of thinking. I'm getting very distracted here myself. It seeks to help me know what to teach and how to teach it, obviously, because I'm a teacher. And it seeks to give me an idea of how to measure progress in the child. Is this helpful to you? Yes? Yeah. 5. It's helpful to 5 of you. That's good. That's better than none of you, I guess. I get very bored with myself talking. I can talk all day, you know, I'm Welsh. But sometimes I think, oh, God, it's me again. Lots of things go wrong. I won't dwell on this, but lots of things go wrong. And these are some of the things that go wrong. I won't dwell on these, but you can read some of these and you'll get an idea. And you've probably seen these things going wrong when your child is being assessed. There's nothing worse than your child is going to an assessment and you're very nervous because it's like going for an exam, and you want your child to be perfect and you want them to do all their good things and none of their bad things, and that usually doesn't happen, of course. And then the person does the wrong things, they do it too quickly, they don't pay attention to the child. I had to watch a girl being assessed in London years ago by a top clinical psychologist in a specialist low vision clinic that was world famous. And they made the girl sit at a table, which she didn't like to do, and she was getting upset. She didn't know the 2 people she was with. And they were banging things on the table, and they wanted her to copy. And every time they banged on the table, she kicked underneath the table. And they went from 1 bang to 2, and she went to 2. And then they went to 3, and she did 3. And they didn't know, because they wanted her to bang with her hand, which is stupid, because they were seeing if she could imitate. Well, she was imitating perfectly, but she was using her leg, because that was much easier for her than lifting her arm, holding something. She couldn't do that movement, because she couldn't turn her wrist, but she could kick the table. And in the end, I said, she's copying you with her foot. And this psychologist said, shh, shh, because I wasn't the one doing the assessment. And at the end of the assessment, of course, the child couldn't copy. She couldn't imitate anything. And I insisted that she was copying beautifully. And she even understood basic mathematics, because she could go from 1 tap to 2 to 3, and back to 2, and back to 3, and down to 1 perfectly. But when the written report came out, it was a different child. They missed the girl, and they came up with somebody completely different. So I could talk all day about how awful things get. So I'm going to go on. I'm going to skip through this and go on to a... I don't like too much on a slide, but this is quite a complicated one. I'll just let you read it, I think. You don't need me to read. This is from a woman called Yanni Klotz, who worked with adults with intellectual disabilities, not CHARGE syndrome, not deaf-blindness. But she's talking about individualizing, and I love that. I've used this quote for many, many years. I don't even know if she's still alive. But what she's saying is, we need to go where the child is. We need to respect who they are. We need to realize that doing an assessment means learning who they are. It's not judgment. We're not doing pass or fail. We're not seeing if they're spoiled or lazy or naughty. We're looking at who they are, how they function, and how they approach the world, and how the world seems to treat them in the immediate environment. And I say in one of my articles, I can't remember which, that the right educational program for every child with CHARGE never already exists. None of you will ever go to a school and see just the right program already there, and your child just kind of slides in. It's impossible, because it has to be individual, and your child isn't in the school yet. And when your child goes into the school, the program has to be designed to fit your child, to provide education. What you mustn't do is have a program already there and then make this child fit into the program and fight with them and hold them and, twist them to make them fit. And unfortunately, schools often operate like that because they don't have the skills, they don't have the resources, they don't have the time to really assess and individualize. So we have to convince them that that's really important, and that's what they need to do. And I'm very aware I'm speaking to a group mostly of parents, and sadly, when you go into a school, you often have no power. And actually, I'm the same. I was never working for a school. I always worked for charities, or in California for a state deaf-blind project. So every school I visited, I was a stranger. I was an outsider. I had no authority. And I could write things, and I'm a teacher, so I could write with the right words, and I could, explain things very well, but it often didn't work. And one of the nice things about moving to California is because I have a British accent. So every school I go to, at the moment I speak, they go, "Oh, you're English." They always bow to me. And I use that a lot, shamelessly. And they talk about Downton Abbey and Dame Judi Dench and things like that. And I say, oh, yes, you know. But we do need to get that message across. The child can't just be pushed into a pre-existing program. It will have to be changed. Even in the best school, the existing programs will have to change in some way so that your child gets the education they're supposed to get. And the fit between the child and the program needs to be alive, because your child is going to be changing and learning. They're going to go through good periods and bad periods, and children with CHARGE are particularly good at having bad periods for all sorts of reasons, mainly medical, sometimes sensory. And pain, as we know, can be a big issue, but also sensory status. And with the kind of sensory problems of vision and hearing that your children have, they may see very well in a certain level of light, but if the light gets too dark or too bright, suddenly they can't see very well at all. And that makes sense. But the school might think the child is being lazy or difficult, because she could see that this morning. So I know she can see it, but you're now in a different room with different light, and the object is no longer on a plain background, it's on a table with patterns on, you know, and people don't understand those variabilities. So, we talked last night, we have Connie here from the Netherlands, and we talked about her great compatriot who died a couple of years ago, Jan van Dijk, who is the greatest guru in the field of deafblindness and also got involved in CHARGE towards the end of his life. And when I was still a schoolboy in 1966, he told us, as teachers, we should follow the child. We shouldn't say to the children, follow me. I'm the teacher, I'm like the Pied Piper, and you will all follow me. That's good teaching. I need to find the child and then follow them and fit my behavior to them, who they are, what they like, what they're interested in, and what they're doing. And he eventually published a book, and we all owe him a huge debt. I came into deafblindness 39 years ago, and a few weeks later, I met Jan van Dijk, and he did a whole day, and I sat right in front of him, and I wrote about 20 pages of notes with exclamation marks and arrows and all this. I was so excited. He really was a genius. And he published a book about his assessment approach, and he said, it's difficult for teachers to understand, because there's no prescribed protocol. There's no structure, because you're observing the child. So it's what they do that gives you the structure, and you don't know in advance what they're going to do. That is very frightening to professionals. They don't like that. They want to be in control. They want to plan and then do what they planned. And the child doesn't know the plan, of course, or they don't care about the plan because it's not their plan. There's no specific way of implementing the order because the child decides the order. There's no set of testing materials. The child is your testing. The child is your checklist, in a way. Every assessment is unique, and there's no set interpretation scale. At the end of this, you're not going to say, this child is a 4.5, whatever that means. You're also not going to say, this 5-year-old child is at a 12-month level, which is a very popular way of interpreting an assessment and doesn't make sense. You can't be 5 years old and be like a child who's 1 year old, because children who are 1 year old have not been alive for 5 years, experiencing the world for 5 years. So that is not an acceptable structure. And I understand why people do it as a quick shorthand. And I can especially see in the medical field that can be a very good, quick way to picture the level the child is functioning at. But in education, it's not helpful. He also says that the approach is child-guided, it's fluid. It can go any way that the child wants to go. It looks at the processes children use to learn and develop, and it's summarized in terms of strengths and next steps for intervention. This is from the article in Trauma Verbal, and it's long and it's small, and I'm not going to make you read it because it's in the article, so get this. What am I saying here? Can I read the German? Yeah, what I'm saying is, really, when I meet a child to do an assessment, I think assessment is like asking questions. There's something you don't know, and it's called the child, and you're trying to discover answers. So you're going to be asking questions in your mind, and maybe the parents or the teacher, maybe even the child you'll ask. What are the main questions in my mind when I first meet the child? These are my 4 key questions. How do you feel? What do you like? I think, what do you want? And what do you do? And the last one is the most important one, but they're all important, and I'll talk more about them. So think of those questions. I use these questions when I train teachers at San Francisco State University, and one of the teachers, when she went to observe a child, she had 4 pieces of paper, and she wrote the first question on the first piece of paper, the second. And if the child gave her any idea how they were feeling, she wrote that down on the first sheet. If they showed they liked something, she wrote that down on the second sheet. And it gave her a very simple structure to organize her observations of the child. So let's go through them. I've never done this before. This is new for me, especially for Germany. Because I've done so much here, I don't know anymore. So I said to Claudia, oh God, they've heard me so many times. And then I thought, let's go into a little bit of detail. So how do you feel? That means lots of things. And in CHARGE, it relates to some very important things. First of all, arousal levels, or what in English we call the biobehavioral state, or des biologischen Verhaltens. And that means different things to different people. And there's a good teacher in New York who now works for the New York Deafblind Project, and he's very skilled. He's a teacher of the blind, but he's very interested in arousal. And I have a quote from him. His name is Chris Russell, and he says, he talks about availability for learning. Availability for learning refers to the time when an individual is paying attention and is able to listen and look, I would say, and respond. Many children with sensory impairments have medical and health challenges. These factors often make self-regulation particularly difficult. A biobehavioral state is the state of arousal. So you may not understand what that means. So I've got a simple table. These are the 9 levels of arousal. And I use this a lot in my teaching. I call it the ladder of arousal. And at the top, you have the highest level of arousal, and at the bottom, you have the lowest level. And we are all on that ladder, unless we die. If you die, you fall off the ladder. But as long as you're breathing, you are somewhere on the ladder. And you're all on the ladder now. And what's interesting, because I'm a good observer, at 2 o'clock, most of you were on the active wach level, I would guess. Now, you've all gone down at least one step. Some of you have gone down 2 steps. Nobody's gone way down, but we still have 20 minutes, so we'll see. The problem for the children is your children don't know about this. They don't understand this. I can say to you, where are you on the ladder at this very moment? And you can give me a good idea. You can tell where you are. You have experience. The other thing you can do, which your children might not be able to do, if you're going down the ladder, and I'm watching you so I can see if you go too far down, I won't say anything, but I'll know. You have strategies to bring yourself back up the ladder. You can manipulate your arousal. You change your position. You do a stretch. You yawn. You take in some oxygen. You cross your legs and you start to bounce the top foot. You know, all these strategies. Or, if it's unlikely, but if I make you very angry and you start to go up the ladder, you also know, if you're getting too angry, you know you're not supposed to jump up and shout at me, I hope. And you also have strategies to calm down. The ultimate strategy is to get up and leave the room, of course. But you can also do deep breathing, deep pressure, especially crossing the legs, crossing the arms, putting the arms tight behind your back. All these deep proprioceptive inputs tend to have a calming impact, along with the deep breathing. And I've done a lot of work in classrooms to help the teachers work on this with the child with charge, because children with charge don't control their arousal levels very effectively. And they often go down the ladder suddenly with fatigue, very tired. But more of a problem, they often shoot up the ladder. And sometimes they seem to shoot up the ladder without any warning at all. And everyone's saying, what happened? Why did that happen? If I'm in the corner with my pen, I can sometimes see it coming because I don't have anything else to think about. You know, you're not in that position. So it's a great luxury for me. And I have to remember that I've been in the corner with no duties at all except watching. And I've seen some very successful work done where instead of these words, the ladder is represented by faces, like screaming face, smiling face, serious face, sleeping face. And maybe you have an arrow on a string and the child can move it up and down. Or you can have other words like angry and tired, or you can have Braille words. And sometimes it can be just 3 things. Sometimes it can be 8 or 9 things. We talked this morning with a parent about working on her son's understanding of emotions and giving him more of a vocabulary for his emotions as part of learning to feel his emotions. So, can children with charge bring themselves up and down the ladder? And the answer is yes. They do it by self-stimulating. And when I go into schools, the most common question that teachers have when I walk in with children with charge is, can you help us stop her self-stimulating? She likes to rock, and we keep trying to stop her, but she keeps rocking. And it's great when they say that, because I think, boy, we have a big problem here with the school. And I always say, what does it mean? And they look confused because they think it doesn't mean, it's just rocking and it doesn't mean anything. Well, obviously it means something. And then, as they're speaking to me, they're probably doing this, or they're going from foot to foot, or they've got a pen and they're going tappy, 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 tappy. And I say, well, I notice you're self-stimulating. Why do you do it? And they think, no, I don't self-stimulate. The child self-stimulates. We all self-stimulate. We have to self-stimulate. It keeps us sane. It keeps us awake. It keeps us calm. It keeps us occupied. It helps us to function. It's crucially important. You're all self-stimming. We've got at least one hair toucher in the room. And this person is not pulling their hair, but there's quite a lot of touching. And it's mostly right-handed, and occasionally it goes left-handed. And I'm thinking, why would you switch hands? I don't know. And I'm not assessing you, but I'm noticing. But really, self-stimulation is a very dirty word in British and Californian schools, and it's very silly. And I know sometimes children with CHARGE can self-stimulate to a dangerous level where they can hurt themselves. That we need to intervene very quickly. But most of the self-stimulation I'm asked to stop is not dangerous. And I say, let's look at him self-stimulating. And they say he rocks all the time. I observed the child for an hour, and he's only rocked 5 times for a total of 8 minutes in 60 minutes. So when you say all the time, that's completely misleading. It isn't at all the time. Let's think about what was happening when he did rock, and especially what happened after he rocked and he stopped rocking. What you find very often is after the child self-stimulates, they're more alert, they're more attentive, their posture improves, they've kind of woken themselves up or calmed themselves down, and they're back. They're available again for learning, but they can't be available for too long. Paying attention is difficult for them, and it has to come in little short bursts. You're managing to, you look as if you're paying attention to me, and you know, you're skilled, you're socially aware, and you know that you'll be free in 15 minutes. The child might not know that yet. But really, self-stimulation is often a way of self-regulating. It's often a way of calming down, waking up, or in bringing your attention back when you're getting bored or distracted and your brain is not thinking. So, pictures. Children with CHARGE. This is often called oral stimulation. And this is a scarf specially for children who need to chew. Usually they use their clothes, and the clothes are wet with saliva, and sometimes they're ripped because they bite them. And you can now buy these. You can also buy jewelry, which is made of soft silicone. I think of this as deep pressure stimulation, not oral stimulation. Most times children do this, they are biting their teeth and their jaw very hard. It's a way of getting deep pressure, which is calming. It can also be alerting if you're getting tired, but also if you have vestibular problems, your brain doesn't know where your head is very effectively. And if you clamp your teeth and your jaw on something, your brain gets a much better idea where your head is. And also, if you have vision problems, if you clamp your teeth, it brings your eyes together in alignment more effectively. So especially if you have one lazy eye, if you clamp your teeth together, it's more likely that the eye will come in and work together. And it's the same with sucking. Vision teachers often give children a straw and a McDonald's milkshake, because you go. And as you suck, the eyes come in. So there are multiple reasons why children like things in their mouth. Does this boy have CHARGE syndrome, would you say? It's so obvious. First of all, because of that one ankle on the other knee, which almost every person with charge does for at least the first few years, sometimes for the first 10 years or 20 years or 45 years. One man I know in England. But look in his mouth, he's got a silicone piece for clamping the jaw. It helps his posture. It helps him keep calm. And it helps him pay attention to what's happening. Classic charge, lying on the floor, using a tablet, but look at the legs. You can't see very clearly. Even in this position, the legs are crossed. And that crossing, that deep pressure, tells her brain where her legs are, and her legs are fixed. They're not moving. She's not going to fall over. Everything is good. All her attention can go on to vision and the thumbs for using the tablet. But without doing that, she doesn't feel safe, so she's not able to pay attention because she has charge. How to look across a room. I have some wonderful pictures of Claudia and Heiko's son, upside down with his legs all. And he's completely relaxed, looking at his tablet, and you think, this is so bizarre. This is weird behavior, but it's totally functional, adaptive behavior. It has complete logical meaning for the children. Here's a girl who actually doesn't have charge. She was born very prematurely. She's a teenager. She's doing a strenuous activity outside the school using a white cane, and she gets very tired. She's starting to, instead of walking, she's sliding her feet because she's tired. Her body is slumping forwards. She's bringing her head down. And instead of tapping the cane side to side, she's leaning on it, and it's beginning to bend like a banana. But the teachers know this, and when they get to the swing, she has a break. She gives them the cane. She gets in this position, and they said, every time she does this, she gets in exactly the same position. This is not random. It's not accidental. It's not wild. It's very carefully calculated. In other words, it's intelligent, meaningful behavior. And she moves her body just enough to swing. They give her 2 minutes. The day I was there, she didn't need 2 minutes. She took 1.5 minutes. She got up, they gave her the cane. Suddenly, she's lifting her feet to walk. Her head is up here instead of down there, and the cane is going side to side. Her whole ability to function has been brought back to the best possible ability by 1.5 minutes in this position. She's reorganizing her whole body so that she can function effectively. Here's somebody at a medical appointment, and you know, what's the correct way to sit in a chair? Well, if you've got CHARGE syndrome, if you're very worried, if you've been to the doctor before, so you know who he is and what he does, this is probably a good way to get through that difficult waiting period. Because in my experience, when I'm with the dentist, it's never as bad as when I'm going to the dentist. I mean, I always have all these horror scenarios in mind. Here's a boy in England who's supposed to be watching, I think it's Peppa Pig, but you see, he's got much better idea. He's squeezing, he's getting deep pressure because he's been very active and very busy, and he needs to reorganize his system. Here's a young baby doing something very unusual in babies. Babies never learn to cross their fingers until they're about 2 years old, unless they have CHARGE syndrome, in which case they don't feel their bodies, so they cross their fingers, and instantly you've got deep pressure and twisting, proprioceptive stimulation, telling you where your hands are. And here's my colleague, Jackie's daughter, who could bend her fingers back so her nails touched her arm. And she did it whenever she was getting stressed. They knew she was getting tired or stressed. I'm still talking, but I've almost finished. How do you feel? I've talked about arousal levels and self-regulation. Let's think about tiredness. I made a list of 21 charge issues which can cause fatigue. And what I meant was any one of these can make you tired. And then when you look at the list, think about your child. Your child probably has 5 of those things or 6 of those things. I presented in the US last year on Zoom, and a mother messaged in the chat box. She said, my son has 18 of those, and everyone calls him lazy. And we need to share this with people. We need to, make people understand if they won't understand. So how do you feel is important? Is this a good day or a bad day? Did she sleep well last night? Is she ill or is she healthy? Am I seeing her at her best, or am I seeing her at a not very good day? Because that helps me. My next question was, what do you like? And that's about motivation and meaning. And with children with charge, if you teach on using things they don't like or they don't know, you probably won't be successful. If you go with their obsession, it could be very successful. And Rob Last from Australia always says, don't call it an obsession, call it a hobby. Because we have hobbies. And he always shows a picture of his CD collection at home. And all his CDs are in alphabetical order. And if anyone takes a CD out and puts it back in the wrong place, he has to go and put it back in the right place. It's normal human behavior. But if you have charge, if you have multisensory impairment, you have to impose control on the world very, very tightly. It's a survival tactic. One of the parents in Australia, Madeline, her son, who's now an adult, is obsessed with caravans. And he collects catalogues of caravans, and he cuts out the photographs and makes scrapbooks. And they go to exhibitions where there are caravans for sale. He knows the name of each caravan design, the manufacturers. He knows how big they are. He can arrange them from the longest caravan to the shortest one. So he's doing math, he's doing vocabulary, he's doing hand-eye coordination. And also in Australia, Rob Last took me to see a 15-year-old girl with charge who was obsessed with sharks. And she couldn't wait to take me up to her bedroom. And I went, wow, because she had a life-sized inflatable shark hanging from the ceiling. Her bed cover was sharks. She had books and magazines about sharks, posters about sharks, model sharks. She also could tell you the biggest shark, all the way down to the smallest shark. She knew where they were in the world, so geography, vocabulary, maths, biology, you name it. So, meaning. This is an interesting one. How well does the child indicate what they want? How well do they communicate totally spontaneously? Children who can't communicate. I met one yesterday, and it turned out he communicated really well because his dad gave him a little rabbit, and I think maybe by accident the rabbit fell over out of the stroller, and he started to smile, and his father gave it back to him, and instantly the rabbit went out, and it went on and on. And then the boy realized, oh, my father's that side, so this time I'm going to throw it that way. I could see all this coming in this young baby, where we need to, that is assessment. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for, does he recognize 3 signs or whatever. So how communicative is the child already? And then what do you do? Because what you do all by yourself spontaneously, you either like it or you need to do it. And sometimes it's both. You like it because you need to do it, and you do it so much that you grow to like it, and it becomes a part of you. And Jan van Dijk told us 50 years ago, 60 years ago, if the child is rocking on the floor, why don't you get on the floor and rock next to them? This is the example he gave. But you rock so that you bump the child each time, just a little bit, so he knows you're there. And does he notice? Does he stop because you're there? And can you bump him more? And then can you start and get faster? And does he realize you've got faster? Does he get faster as well? Or does he stop? Does he laugh? Does he hit you because you're spoiling his game? You know, how do you make contact in the beginning? And in the end, Van Dijk ends up behind the boy with his arms and legs round him, and they're going and they're changing the speed, and he feels the boy going with him, and then he lets the boy know that now the boy can decide how fast they're going, and Jan will change. And they're starting to form a relationship through rocking. And I was in a training, he talked about this, and a teacher said, but if you do that, you're just encouraging the child to rock more. And Jan smiled very sweetly, and I knew he wanted to scream because the whole point was being missed, you know, but anyway. I have two last slides, and I'm finishing on time. This is very unusual. Most people focus on the child's disabilities, but close attention to their abilities can reveal more about the difficulties they face, as well as the strategies they use to function effectively. And when you observe a child doing something, especially a kind of self-stimulation, like looking at the fingers, or sucking the fingers, or rocking, or rubbing the head, what are they like afterwards? What changes because of the behavior? Because that might give you an idea of the function of the behavior. Why were they doing that? Like the girl on the swing, where it was very clear. But if you didn't observe her after the swing, you wouldn't have seen why she did it. And then my final slide, everything that children with CHARGE do has meaning. And for the teacher, the first job is to understand what it means or to make a good guess, and to do that by discussing with other people. So that was my presentation. But I would recommend the article because it's a little more clear, I think, maybe. And use quotes. I think as parents, you are automatically at a disadvantage with the educational world. And sometimes, I'm sad to say, but sometimes if you give them a quote from me or Kim, they might pay more attention. You know, it backs up what you're saying. So it isn't just you saying nice things about your child. This is actually real about children with CHARGE syndrome and the things they do and the things that they need. So, thank you. And there's no time for questions, which I always like.
Ja, das ist die Frage. Haben wir noch Zeit? Theoretisch wäre jetzt Kaffeepause. Wollt ihr noch ein, zwei Fragen?
Claudia says it would be a coffee break now. Are there maybe a couple of questions?
Okay, David, you need your headphones. Hold on.
Yes, I do. They're on the books.
Wenn wir ihn schon noch da haben oder ihn da haben, müssen wir es ausnutzen.
Ja, halt Bitte du kurz das
Since
Mikro, weil
we
ich wollte mich
have him
zeigen,
with
weil
us, we need to
unsere
make
Tochter
best
hat vor
use of
kurzem
it.
halt
Now,
mal
the
so
question.
angefangen, also sie betet
I know
den ganzen
our
Tag, weil das
daughter
ist für alle
has
gar nicht so
started
religiös.
praying
Und die
recently.
hält
We're not a
gerne so
religious
ganz
family,
viel.
but
Und
she
das fand
has
ich ganz
the hands in
interessant
this
zu erfahren,
praying position
dass
a
es
whole
so einen
lot, and it was
Hintergrund hat.
very
Aber
interesting for
manchmal
me
hält die
now
den
to
ganzen
learn that
Tag
there's a
eine
reason
Hand
to it.
so,
Or sometimes she holds one hand like
die in der
that all
Schule
day,
schreiben die dann ins Heft rein,
or
sie hat die ganzen
at
Tag
school
die Hand so und
they
die
will then
kriegen
write
sie
in
nicht
my
auf und wissen
notice
nicht, einmal hat sie sogar
leaflet, she's
beide
been
Hände
holding
so und
her
dann
hand
wollte
like
sie
that
zum
all
Essen
day,
einfach
and
so
then
den
she
Kopf
held
so
both hands and
direkt vom
wanted to
Teller aufessen. Das haben sie dann
eat by
unterbunden. Das
just
fand ich dann
bowing her
auch
head to
wiederum
the
gut, weil
to the
ich finde,
plate, which they
man muss
didn't
jetzt
let
auch
her
nicht
do,
sich
which I
angewöhnen,
like. I mean,
immer so ohne Hände zu essen.
she shouldn't get used to eating without her hands all the time. But I found it just fascinating to hear that that's something that works for her, that gives her some feedback. She started doing that a few months ago only. Can it start like that all of a sudden? Can it go through different phases, apparently? And yeah, to me now that was very, very enlightening. I now have an idea why that might be and that there is such a thing which I now pass on to the school. What they make of it, I don't know. They'll probably tell me, yeah, we still don't like it, I don't know. Especially since her hands for the teachers and for us are the tools, and they want to bring her to use sign language, or they want to touch her hands and she wouldn't allow that, and then automatically she's almost excluded from class, saying, we can't work with her anymore, she won't let us touch her hands. That's the idea.
Well, as I said at the beginning, it's very complicated. So why would she suddenly start pressing? Well, she's getting pressure. Now, to me, the first thing I think is if you have vestibular dysfunction, you have balance problems. You don't have great, your brain doesn't feel your body very well. And what this does is it brings you into the center. Just like biting down, it brings everything into the center. And if you really push, it gives your brain a much better idea where your body is and whether your body is moving or whether it's fixed and stable and stationary. That's one thing. Another thing it could do is give her better head control. She uses vision. Yeah. Because of the vestibular problem, she lacks a reflex. There is a reflex that's triggered by the vestibular sense that deals with head movement. So I have the reflex. So I can look at you and I can make eye contact. Then I can move my eyes all over the place and I'm still looking at you. Because my vestibular sense is telling me how to move my eyes because of where my head. So when my head goes down, my vestibular sense tells me to move my eyes up. And I still look at you. For most children with charge, they don't have that reflex. So if their head moves, their eyes go with it, and then they have to look for you again, which is why they often put their head down on the table to look. If they're looking at pictures, they do this. They need the head to be fixed so it doesn't move. They do this. Or they stand and they push their head back against the wall so they can watch people because they don't want their head to move. And doing this automatically gives you better control over your trunk and your shoulders and your head. So that's another possibility. And if she's anxious or in some discomfort or pain, this would also be a good approach. So there are a couple of possibilities. And with each of those, you then say, well, if she's trying to, control her head for vision, what kind of activities is she doing when she does this? And does she do it all day long? Because schools love to say children do things all the time. And I think, well, they don't. Nobody does anything all the time, except breathing. But, we've got to get away from he rocks all the time. Nobody does. And she can't be doing that all the time. So what's the context? Is the situation causing her to do this? Or is she doing it to function better? Or after she's done it for a while, does she have better posture? Or does she look more alert? Or does she look more relaxed? But most self-stimulation behaviors provide proprioceptive stimulation. Most of them are designed to give pressure or stretching or twisting, whether it's the ankle up on the other knee, or the arms twisted, or rolling into a ball, or pushing the palms together, or bending the fingers, or squeezing the head, or putting a box very tight down on your head. You see that quite often. That is a great way to control your head better. I've got wonderful pictures of kids with plastic buckets pulled over their head. Then they look at the tablet because their head isn't moving so much because it's got this heavy thing on it, which gives them more awareness and more control. You know, whatever they do, we should say, what does this mean, always? Rather than, how can we stop her doing this because we need her to sign and she can't sign? Well, you shouldn't be trying to stop it until you know what it means, because if you know what it means, you can come up with a strategy to give her something else so that she doesn't have to do this. It's very complicated. I'm making it sound like real easy, but...
Ja, ich habe auch noch mal eine Frage, und zwar
Yes, I also have a
Marcel,
question.
der hat ja
Marcel, my son,
sein Schiff immer dabei und
he
das
always
gibt ihm
has his
Sicherheit.
boat with
Das
him
habe
that
ich jetzt auch
provides him with
festgestellt. Und,
safety, certainty. He
jetzt ist es
realized that
so,
when he has his
gerade
boat with
vom
him, he's
Verhalten
fine.
her,
And now in
dass
terms of
wenn wir jetzt
behavior,
zum Charge-Treffen
when we're here at the
fahren,
Charge
wir
Conference,
Freitag
for
fahren,
example,
Sonntag
we
nach
leave on
Hause
Friday,
fahren
we come
und
back on
er
Sunday,
gefühlte
and
50 Mal,
it feels
immer
like
wenn irgendwas
50
ist,
times that
Freitag,
whenever
Samstag,
something
Sonntag
happens,
nach Hause.
he'd say, Friday,
Ich
Saturday,
weiß,
Sunday,
dass es
home.
ihm, ja, Sicherheit gibt
I
und
know
dass
that
er
that's
sich
just to
dadurch,
provide him with a
sehr
feeling of
gut fühlt.
safety, of
Fahren wir
feeling
zu
at
Freunden,
ease.
fragt er,
Are we
wann
going
kommen
to
wir wieder nach
friends?
Hause?
When are we
Wir sind
going
noch keine
home?
5 Minuten
Whenever
da.
we're going to friends, he
Und
asked, when are we
das
going
sind,
home? And we haven't even
ja,
arrived,
lauter
about
so
5 minutes ago.
Stationen, egal wo
But
wir
that's
hin sind, dass er
exactly
immer
like
wieder
that. Wherever we
nachfragt
go,
und
he
immer
keeps
wieder,
asking,
gebe ich ihm
time and
wieder
again,
diese
when are we
20
going
Mal dieselbe
home? And I
Antwort.
give
Ja,
him the
wir
same
fahren nach
answer
Hause.
30 times in a
Da habe ich
row.
keine
Yes,
Strategie.
we're going home
Was
after a
biete ich
while,
ihm
but I
denn
don't
als
have a good strategy on that
Alternative
yet. Any
an?
alternative I
Ignoriere ich ihn
can
oder?
offer? Do I ignore it?
What you're describing is fairly typical of lots of children
Genau, ja.
with charge. I wrote an article with Tim a couple of years ago about charge behavior, and we said if there's a behavior which concerns you, we would first think about 3 things: pain, anxiety, which is really what you're describing, and then sensory problems. And it sounds like Marcel is classically anxious, and I've met Marcel quite often. I've seen him here, but I haven't met him this time. And I think the boat is fine, but asking the question isn't fine, because you have to, you can't go crazy, you know. You're you and you're his mother. And the only strategies we come up with are like a calendar or a way of measuring how many days till we go home, or getting him to do it himself and make his own calendar.
Ja, auch das haben wir zu Hause.
Yes,
Also,
we've
den
got
nehmen
that
wir
too.
auch
We've
mit.
got a
Jetzt waren
calendar.
wir
We
im
always
Urlaub,
take it
haben den
along.
Kalender
We've just
mal
been
bewusst
on holiday and
mitgenommen.
deliberately did
konnte
not
mir
take the
jeden
calendar
Tag
along.
sagen,
But every
und er
single
hatte
day
mir
he
dann
was
jeden
able to
Tag
tell me which day it was, and
gebärdet,
every
heute
day
ist
he would
Dienstag, wir
sign
fahren
to me,
nächste Woche
it's Tuesday
Donnerstag
now,
nach
we're going
Hause.
home, Thursday
Jeden
next
Morgen,
week.
ja.
Every single morning
Also,
he would
den
give me
Kalender
that.
haben wir auch schon.
So we tried the calendar.
Ja, das ist so ein bisschen
Yeah, it's
hilflos.
we're kind of helpless now.
Let me think. I don't have a single good idea. Sorry, I don't have a single good idea. But I think in terms of multisensory issues and control, having some control over the world simply by understanding it is what he's demonstrating, I think. And all you can do, I think, is try and provide that security with things like the calendar system or the book. Van Dyck showed film of a boy with charge in the Netherlands 30 years ago. He had a communication book, and it had drawings of the signs and the word. And it was made just for him. It had about 30 signs. And they take the boy to the school gymnasium to do some physical exercise. And the boy gets very upset. And they realize, oh, we didn't bring the communication book. And the teacher says, you wait here, I'll go get the book. She goes off, and the boy is so anxious, and he goes up and down, up and down. The teacher comes back, and the boy is so happy, and he takes the book, and he puts it on the shelf, and then he's ready to do the exercise. He didn't want to use the book. He wanted to know where it was. It's a level of anxiety that we don't understand because we have a lot of control over our world. You know, we know where we're going on holiday this summer. We know what we'll be doing on our mother's birthday in October. We have a whole different level of control, mental awareness than the children. And I think that anxiety, it increases with illness. So if the children's balance gets worse, if their vision gets worse, or they lose hearing because they have a cold or influenza, the anxiety goes up, and often the questioning gets more rapid. But I don't know if you can stop it, I'm afraid.
It's just that, yes.
Feedback.
Yeah, feedback between that warm and around.
Sorry.
But he needs it.
This is why I don't like question time. It confuses me. No, I'm joking. Well, I'm not joking. I don't like question time. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have two more, David.
Oh, okay.
Hallo, mein Simon ist. Achso. Ja, wie soll ich anfangen?
How to put it? Maybe you do.
Okay, also der Simon, der ist jetzt 5.
Simon is 5, almost 6 years old now, and our question is, what does he do and what does he want to achieve by it? When we go to the store, when he's together with many people, or simply when he's out and about with Lena, he would grab at people, hold them, really press hard. He'll pull down their glasses or their face masks now with COVID. What do you make of that? Is that stimulation, or is it trying to establish contact? Because sometimes it can be quite painful, or he pulls people's hair and is not ready to let go. What do we make of that behavior? How to interpret that?
Well, as I said, I can't assess a child in 2 minutes, especially if I've never seen them. But I think you are already thinking the right thing. First of all, it's an obvious way to make contact with people. It's not a good way, but it's an obvious way. And I think something you said is important. Children with charge are often accused of being aggressive. And some of them are aggressive, deliberately aggressive. But in many cases, they simply use too much force because they don't have good proprioceptive perception. If they're going to hold something, they have to squeeze it really hard. If you give them your arm to walk across the room, they can hurt you because they squeeze so tight, because that's the only way their brain can feel that they are holding onto you. If they need to tap you to get your attention, they probably hit you quite hard, not because they're trying to hurt you or because they're angry, but because they just can't control the movement in a very refined way. So that's part of the problem, I think. He's probably more violent because of his sensory issues. But I think the behavior itself could be due to overstimulation. As you said, when we're in the store or when we're out and about, it's remarkable to me how many children with CHARGE syndrome can't be in a supermarket. It's like one of the worst places in the world to put them. it drives them crazy, it produces tantrums, and it often produces a kind of violence where they have to hit people, they have to run and sweep everything off the shelf, and those kind of behaviors. And I think that often is overstimulation. And one of the great things about self-stimulation is it gives you an idea what the child likes and needs, and sometimes you can use that to prepare them. So, for example, if you're going to the shop and he's coming with you, can you do some, I'm a big fan of massage, deep pressure massage, I think is like the miracle drug for children with CHARGE. Even if it's just shoulder massage or neck massage and rhythmic pressure down through the top of his head, just for a minute or two before you get in the car and go to the shop, and see if it makes a difference. Because those inputs can last for over 30 minutes in his neural system. So sometimes we can prepare children. And in school, I'm always saying, this girl needs regular breaks. And she doesn't just need the break the class gets. Like we start at 8, and then we have a break at 10, and then we have a break at 11:30. She needs breaks maybe every 20 to 30 minutes. And for her, a break is going for a walk or a run or jumping. For the next child with CHARGE, a break is going to lie on the floor and do some deep breathing and kick your legs. For another child, they need you to massage their shoulder and head, because that's a great way of calming them down and helping to get rid of all this overstimulation that's in their system and driving them crazy. So I'm just firing that at you. And I now expect you to massage him every time you go out.
Also, wir haben das Problem, dass unser Sohn
Our
sich
problem
selber
is
sehr, sehr,
that
sehr stark
our
auf den Kiefer
son
schlägt.
hits himself very, very hard on his jaw. It happens more at school than it does at home. But at school, they felt that he was being overtaxed, that it was all getting too much for him, and we just went on vacation. And what we realized was that when he started hitting his jaw, we took his hand and we put it, I put it in my pocket, or his dad put his hand in his pocket, or I massaged his hand or his fingers, and that helped calm him down for a short period of time. Now, at home, it doesn't really happen all that often, and it works better than it does at school. What else could we be doing, or what is it that the school could do to better deal with him and to help him, to keep helping him?
I think you said two important things. First, it happens much more at school, and you think, well, the answer is in school rather than at home. And secondly, it's his jaw. So I would want, if I were going into the school, I'd want to look at a typical morning and see where they could perhaps slow down or do things a little bit differently. Maybe he's sitting too long in a chair, or maybe they're moving around too much. It all depends. Maybe he needs some regular breaks. And does the break mean lying on the floor, or does it mean doing some jumping? Because it depends on the child. But the other thing is, if it tends to be the face and the jaw, which is quite common, maybe these areas need some really deep pressure massage before each activity at school. The sensory inputs I'm describing through massage are very powerful. And you can almost destroy a child with the wrong sensory input, or you can really bring them alert and awake and available. And maybe that an issue is here. This is also a classic area to store stress. We all tend to store stress in our jaw because we clench when we're anxious, or our shoulders, and we get a headache, or our butt. You know, the butt goes because you're worried and you're anxious. And it might be that the stress of being pushed too hard at school or pushed for too long is causing some pain here. And the hitting is actually his way of trying to relieve the pressure on his jaw, possibly. Everything I say here is just possibilities. But I'm showing how we should be thinking about the children. That's the important thing. Because they do everything for a reason, even if it looks nuts. You know, if it looks crazy, it's for a reason. I think Kim is on next, isn't she?
Yeah, she's. Kim needs a break.
They loved you, but they want to have a break.
Yeah, we can listen to you.
And I want to listen to Kim.
Yeah.
You go for a break as well. Sorry? I know. I'll get you up there. Coffee, chocolate, ice cream, everything.
Wir könnten David noch ewig zuhören.
Now, we could keep listening to David for ages, but I would suggest we take a break at this point. I just spoke with Kim. We'll start at 4:10. Yeah, 4:10. And we'll meet again here. Thank you, David.